I'd like to immediately preface this video by saying that Xbox and Compulsion sent me a code for this game. Now I just wanted to say this to get it out of the way and be completely transparent, because whatever my opinions are of this game is genuine. Them sending me the code has no factor into this as to whether or not I will like it. If I like it, I like it. If I don't, I don't. And to be quite honest, I would have reviewed this game no matter what because I had already installed it on Game Pass and would have played it anyway. But anyway, that's enough chitter chatter, on to the review. On the surface, South of Midnight just seems like this quirky, fun-filled adventure. And it is. Kinda. But it's also a lot more than that. Honestly, I barely remembered what I'd seen in the trailers, so this is the kind of game that surprised me with how much deeper it all is. And I wasn't prepared for how dark it could get at certain points. It's not super dark, but it might be kind of unexpected when you come across certain moments. But with the darker tones and themes, there's thankfully lighter, sometimes heartwarming moments to help balance it. There's also something about the vibe that reminds me of Resident Evil Village, specifically the Village of Shadows storybook at the beginning of the game. South of Midnight has a similar handcrafted eerie fairy tale quality where everything feels like it's part of a larger fable, one featuring a giant fish. That fits perfectly considering that the game itself is structured like a storybook, complete with chapter transitions and narration. But all of this is well bound together with its art style and art direction, which are probably some of the best things about this. And I'm really loving this recent resurgence of these stop-motion or claymation-style animations we've been seeing in film, TV, and video games lately. It really helps set it apart from other video games in this genre because it adds a layer of unique personality to it. Now, one may have some reservations when it comes to having this style in a video game, especially where frame rate is concerned. Because in most media that makes use of the style, it either replicates or simulates that lower frame rate. But when talking about video games, frame rate is one of the most important aspects to it, and even more so important for faster-paced action games. So the concern here may lead some to ask questions like, how does this style effectively mesh with the gameplay? Will it not feel weird and make it feel difficult to push through? Does it affect the rhythm of the traversal or the combat? But I can happily report and reassure you that it's not an issue at all. I'll admit, I had these concerns too when first watching all that gameplay footage, but when you actually experience it for yourself and play it for yourself, you'll quickly come to realize that it affects nothing. The best way to describe it is like the Spider-Verse skin for Miles in the Insomniac games. And the reason why this works is because, from my understanding, the animations of the model itself are made to appear about 12 to 15 FPS, but it still feels smooth because under the hood, everything is still running at that higher frame rate of 60, and thus it feels responsive and immediate with all the button inputs. But fear not, because if you're not a fan of it still, there is a setting to toggle it on and off. Just note that it will still be present in cutscenes, which run at 30 frames, rather than 60. The combat is really fun in my opinion. This is one of the rare times where my opinions diverge from a lot of reviewers out there, because there are quite a few I've heard who surprisingly weren't massive fans of it. But honestly, I really was, because it's simple and it's flashy and fluid and can actually get pretty challenging at certain points. The way that the combat encounters work in this game are usually in little pockets of the map that act as mini arenas for you to fight in. And once you've dealt with all these enemies in that arena, you need to clear the area of Stigma, which may seem familiar to you if you've played Kena Bridge of Spirit, where you have to clear the corruption in those areas. I mean, even the gameplay loop itself is very much alike in a lot of ways. And by the way, if you haven't played Kena, I highly recommend checking that out, especially if you're a fan of this game and Zelda and Pixar movies. It was one of my favorite games of 2021 for a reason. But as another point of comparison, the combat itself and the enemy types heavily remind me of those seen in Alice Madness Returns, another underrated gem I'd highly recommend. There's also a decent level of enemy variety as well that keeps the gameplay loop from going stale. But as you progress, like in a lot of games, new enemy types are added, giving you a greater challenge that ramps up the difficulty further you go on. And now, as for the boss fights, I'm not going to show a lot of it, just the footage of this first one, but they're done quite well. They do have a lot of similar formula in how they're structured, and they do have similar attack patterns that you'll be able to grasp and recognize, but that's the case with a lot of games. In this case, what keeps it fresh is how each of these tie into the story. Though I've heard a lot of people not particularly like that last boss fight, but honestly, I didn't mind it. There was something else though that I did mind towards the end, but we'll get more into that later. But if you're really not a fan of the combat, not only are there of course several difficulty modes, they also have a nice accessibility feature that allows you to skip combat and boss encounters altogether. You can even skip the chase sequences if they're not to your liking. While on the subject of chase sequences though, yeah, there's quite a lot of them. to the point where some people might get annoyed by them after a while, but as a fan of many platformers, I quite enjoyed them. However, if the game were any longer, I could definitely see them getting excruciatingly repetitive. But thankfully, the game paces itself well, allowing you to wrap it up in about 9 or 10 hours or so it doesn't overstay its welcome. But to discuss the traversal more broadly, Hazel doesn't just walk from point A to point B. She glides, she swings, and dashes through the decaying beauty of the Deep South. While her weaving abilities are used in combat, they also form the backbone of how you get around. Grapple points let her swing across wide gaps or zip to higher ground, and there's a fluid rhythm to it that feels satisfying when you get into the groove. The game isn't open world, it's actually quite linear, but it's layered, more like interconnected zones that encourage a bit of exploration and backtracking, which is essential for picking up things like floofs to upgrade your abilities. The skill tree, by the way, itself is fairly basic, but there's enough there to keep the combat interesting and allow you to tackle different enemies in different ways. But, we've talked enough about combat. There's almost a dreamlike quality to the way that you move through the environment, sometimes quite literally, with warped gravity and floating platforms woven into the landscape. That said, traversal isn't always perfect. The camera can occasionally struggle to keep up, and some grapple points feel a little too precise or finicky, but for the most part, movement feels purposeful and creative, blending well with the game's magical tone. It's not about speed, it's about the style and grace, weaving through the unknown like you're part of the scenery. And you rarely find yourself getting lost in the environment, because the video game language naturally dictates where to go. And when a game can do that effectively, it means it has very solid level design. But also, there are pockets of areas you won't be able to get through on your own. That's where our little buddy Crouton comes in. Crouton can fit into tight spaces to help unravel Stigma, for example, or be used in combat, or be yeeted across a lake to get to the other side. Yeah, there's a chicken joke in there somewhere. One other area where the game absolutely shines is in its music, and from the moment that the game begins, you're greeted with a hauntingly soulful soundtrack that feels like a love letter to Southern Gothic storytelling. The blues, folk, and spiritual inspired melodies are more than just background noise. They're woven into the emotional DNA of the game. Whether you're exploring the eerie, moss-draped swamps or standing face to face with some interesting creatures, the music always knows exactly how to support the moment. It can be calm and reflective during slower narrative beats, then rise to a tense rhythmic intensity during combat or boss encounters. What makes this especially impactful is how it reinforces the game's themes, which we'll touch more on in a moment. You can feel the roots of the South in every note, every chorus humming at the distance. The music doesn't just set the tone, it tells a story all on its own. It's honestly one of the most standout elements of the experience and deserves recognition for how much atmosphere it adds to the journey. The actors' performances are genuinely solid across the board. Hazel's voice actress brings just the right blend of sass, vulnerability, and strength to the role, something that makes her feel grounded, even as the world around her turns fantastical. Her dynamic with her mother is a real highlight too. I mean, that is kind of the central point of the game. But there's a believable tension between them, a history that you can feel in every exchange. Then there's a mysterious, charismatic character called Rue, whose voice felt instantly familiar. It bugged me at first because I knew I had heard it before, and then I went on IMDb, and sure enough, yeah, it's who I thought it was. It's Ahmed Best. And it's great to see and hear him get more recognition lately, especially considering his past with Star Wars. And he brings such a warmth and subtle charm to Rue that it adds a lot of weight to the character's presence. It's the kind of performance that elevates the role beyond what's on the page. At its core, South of Midnight is a story about grief, legacy, and the burden of generational trauma, especially in the context of Southern history and folklore. You play as Hazel, and without going into spoilers, her journey is deeply personal. It's about coming to terms with what's been left behind, both literally and emotionally, and trying to make sense of a world that's constantly shifting between magical realism and harsh reality. The game does a great job of blending fantasy and folklore with emotional weight. One minute you're chatting with a massive catfish, and next you're being hit with a quiet, introspective moment. There are layers to this world and its characters, and while the storytelling can be subtle at times, it's all the more rewarding if you're willing to pay attention. There's a strong emphasis on identity and understanding where you come from, and the game doesn't shy away from the darker parts of history either. It handles these themes with a surprising amount of care and nuance, and that's something I genuinely didn't expect going in. It gives the whole experience a kind of soulful resonance, like the story is trying to say something meaningful beneath all the magical weirdness. Except, if there is one gripe I have with this game, it is relating to the ending. I'm not going to spoil it, as I said, but the way they tackled the ending did leave me feeling that there was something left to be desired. It ends almost somewhat abruptly, if I'm being honest. Yeah, the main story and the themes are all concluded, and technically it's fine. I'm not going to even say it's a bad ending by any means either. But it feels as though it was getting to something a bit larger, that things were really coming to a head, and there's going to be one final push. But instead kinda just fizzles out. It ends happily, sure, but also somewhat unceremoniously. I don't want to complain too much though about this, because it's not like it doesn't technically deliver on what it was trying to do. It does. It tells the story it wants to tell, and it handles all the themes really well. It's just that the way it ends doesn't have any sort of big finish that I feel it almost was set up to be. Now, I wasn't expecting it to necessarily have a big finish the entire way through, but the way it was paced going into those final minutes, it seemed as though there was going to be something more. And before I knew it, the credits were rolling. Now that gets me wondering if some of these loose ends are at play to tease a potential sequel, but it can come at the cost of leaving the player a little disappointed, rather than igniting that spark of curiosity and intrigue. That all being said, Compulsion Games has come a long way since We Happy Few. That game had ambition. It wanted to explore dystopian conformity, trauma, and drug-fueled denial, but it often felt like it was borrowing too heavily from other games and media. The world was interesting, but the execution felt muddled. It was a game with good ideas, but not a strong enough voice to really make them resonate. At the time, We Happy Few came across as a collage of familiar influences rather than something distinct. It wasn't bad, it was just fine. South of Midnight, on the other hand, feels like the work of a studio that's finally found its identity, finally found its footing. While it still treads on recognizable themes, it presents them through a much stronger lens, one rooted in a specific culture, atmosphere, and tone. There's confidence here that wasn't there before. The storytelling and the characters are more focused, the world building feels more deliberate, and the emotional beats feel earned rather than imposed. It's not that South of Midnight reinvents the wheel, but it feels like it was made by a team that understands what kind of story they wanted to tell, and more importantly, how they wanted to tell it. It's a game that thrives on its atmosphere, its unique visual style, its heartfelt music, and the sincerity of its themes. It's not just about cool animation or flashy combat. It's about identity, grief, legacy, and learning to move forward when the world around you feels like it's falling apart. And it delivers those ideas with more nuance and care than I expected going in. The game may not be for everyone, but if you're open to something a bit more reflective, soulful, and steeped in a very specific cultural tone, South of Midnight might resonate more than you think. I'm genuinely glad I played it, and would have said the same if I hadn't been sent a code. It's not perfect, but it's proof that Compulsion Games is growing into something truly worth watching. Give it a shot, and you might come away surprised with how much it sticks with you.